Hi there and welcome to the Netplan Retirement Masterclass. Now before we get going, it's worth explaining how this thing's put together. We've broken the masterclass up into a number of unique sessions. So each session has a number of topics that form part of that session, and ideally you're going to watch it in the sequence that we put it together. And that's because it's really important to understand that there's base knowledge that we're going to tell you about so that you can understand some of the things that follow on from that. Now you're more than welcome to jump in and out as you need. You can come back and look at things, of course, but if you follow it in order, that's probably the best way to get the most out of the Netplan Retirement Masterclass. All right, let's talk about each of the sessions we're going to work with. Session 1 is all about getting ready for retirement, getting your head around when you're going to pull the pin, what sort of things to think about. We'll then move in directly to a session about tax, understanding how the tax system works. Now, I'm not going to bore you to death and explain, a whole semester's worth of tax law. It'll be the basic building blocks of how the tax system works, because what we find is a lot of people think they know how it works, but they're not quite sure. So we'll just make sure that everyone's working off the same platform. Session 2 is all about investments and how they work. Now, again, this stuff can be dreadfully complicated, but all I'm going to do is take you through the very basics of the bits and pieces that you need to know to understand how to compare different investments and know exactly where your money's going. Session 3 is all about superannuation and account-based pensions, because the reality is that Australia's system depends on the super system, so it's important we understand how all that stuff fits together. Session 4 is all about Centrelink. Now, not everyone's going to be entitled to Centrelink benefits, but I tell you what, there's a lot of people who think they don't qualify when in fact they do. So understanding how that system works is also pretty important. Session 5, we're going to talk a little bit about what happens when you finally shuffle off this mortal coil, what happens to your investments, how do you leave money to your kids and your loved ones, and some of the tax tricks and tips, if you like, to make sure that the tax effects are minimised. And the final part about Session 5 is to bring it all together. So a couple of case studies, couples, singles, all of those sorts of things, so you can understand how it might fit in with your particular circumstances. All right, as we go through each of the sessions, you'll see on the blackboard little bits and pieces, and occasionally there'll be a symbol or two. Now, if you see a triangle, the delta symbol, that's telling you that that particular rate might go up or down. Interest rates, for example, go up or down, so you might see the little triangle there. If you see the hatch symbol, that's that cross hatch, that simply means that the rate is indexed, so it might be a pension payment or something like that. The little hatch sign means it's going to go up once or twice per year. The little double S thing, that simply says that the rules are changing. Now, the rules are always changing. That's why you're here. But in reality, these particular bits that we've identified in the masterclass are things you need to be aware of, because they could be changing sooner rather than later. So I'm going to start with 2 apologies. The first is that you're here in the first place. And that's because the Australian retirement income system, even though it's ranked 3rd in the world behind the Dutch and the Finns, is arguably the world's most complicated. So I'm sorry about that, but that's why we're here. And the second thing is that by the end of these sessions, your head's going to be spinning. And look, we're not expecting to turn you into financial planners yourselves, but at least if you understand how all these bits and pieces work, there'll be things that you hear that you think, that's relevant to me. So put it down in your little notepad. You can come back and look at it later if you need to. But as I say, there's a lot to absorb. Not all of it will apply to you, but at least you'll understand what's in and what's out as far as you're concerned. It's all about educating you so you can build your own financial plan. All right, let's talk about retirement. Now, if you might start the entire process by doing a little bit of reading about how much am I going to need to retire on, right? And you start off by looking at how much does the typical retiree spend. And there's an organisation called the Australian Superannuation Funds of Australia, Association of Superannuation Funds Australia, and they'll tell you that a single spends somewhere between $30,000 and $47,000 per year in their basic expenses, okay? And for a couple, somewhere between $43,000 and $65,000 a year on their basic cost of living. Now, that's basically putting food on the table and running a car. And the $43,000 a year couple probably have chooks and veggies out the back, and the $60,000 a year people are the folks that like to go out for tea once a week, perhaps some coffee with the girls and a round of golf, all of those sort of pretty active lifestyle. So you might sit there and go, okay, well, now that I understand, I want to be pretty safe with my money, Nick. I don't want too much risk. So how much am I going to need? So let's just say I work on a figure between that for a couple of, say, $54,000 a year. And I'm going to work on a reasonably safe figure of about 5%. I'm going to put my money in a safe super fund, so it's in there, or maybe even bank accounts, so slowly creeping back up there. So you work out $54,000 from an investment paying 5% per year. You get the old calculator out, you do 54,000 divided by 5%, and you end up with a figure of 1.08 million. Right, so you total up how much you've got in your super fund, maybe 300,000. $20,000 in the bank, the inheritance from Auntie Myrtle that'll hopefully come through, and you end up with a figure of under $400,000. 1.08 million, 400,000 bucks. What do? You panic. And I come from an industry that thrives on people panicking about things, because what you're going to do is head in to see your financial advisor, or a financial advisor is going to say, oh yes, you need $1 million to retire comfortably. You've only got 400,000. How convenient. I've got some investments I'm ready to sell you. Perhaps it's a U-Butte property up in Roma, Queensland. Lovely place, Roma, I'm sure. But, you know, if I'm in Perth or in Sydney and you're going to be talked into investing something up there, you'd wonder why. Because they're trying to sell you an investment to make money off you. So, an industry that thrives on fear. Now, when you've got that fear, you make perfectly rational decisions. You look for investments that are going to be safe. Things that look like a bank account, paying a relatively high rate of return. And before you know it, you've invested in things like West Point, right? Or things like Mayfair 101 more recently. All of these things are frozen funds. People don't make perfectly sensible decisions. They thought their money was safe and they put their money into it, and of course it wasn't. Or you might come across a U-Butte computer program that tells you how to buy and sell shares, stock picking software, where you plug the shares in and it tells you which ones to buy and sell and you make a fortune. Folks, if I had a program that was guaranteed to tell me which shares to buy and sell at a profit, no risk, am I going to tell you about it? Absolutely not. I'm going to be sitting on a beach somewhere, plugging away in my computer and living off the proceeds, because these things don't work. That's the bottom line. They're all about selling you a program or something in order to make money out of you. So there's the $1 million myth. And if you're lucky enough to have $1 million or 2 or 3 or 4, fantastic. The good news is all the information in the Netplan program still applies. How to manage your funds to get the very best you can out of what you have. But at the same time, for people that have more modest amounts of money, we're going to show you some really neat tricks about how to maximise what you've got. So for example, a couple with $350,000 in savings can generate an income of $61,000 a year, indexed, meaning it's coming up every year, for life, tax-free and using low-risk investments. And for singles with a similar amount to invest, we're talking at least $40,000 a year, indexed for life, tax-free using low risk. So stick with us and we'll show you how.